Everybody. I'm kind of new to this, and it's been great experience being forced to use iNaturalist finally. I've been wanting to do it, and I've learned that the people who take good pictures with their phone have been practicing, and it doesn't take that long to get a little bit better. So anyway, when Lisa asked me to do this, I thought that I would have the chance to actually talk to you all and ask for what you are finding in your yards. And of course, I did go on iNaturalist and see what you posted, but it's not quite as interactive as I had originally imagined. And so please don't hesitate to ask any questions. I have a feeling that a lot of you know a lot of the things I'm talking about. So especially if you've ever been on the Summer Naturalist Rally with Bruce Grimes, and lots of other people know a lot more about butterflies than I do. So I'll probably try to emphasize some things about native bees a little bit more, just because maybe people aren't quite as familiar with that. And of course, Sean did a beautiful job on the overview of insects and arthropods in his program the other day. And he referred you already to the bug guide, which is a terrific resource. So what I'm hoping to do today is kind of walk around my mom's backyard. And in a minute, I will switch so that we'll be looking out that way. She lives next to a creek, and I used to work at a native plant arboretum, and so we planted a lot of native plants, and then they did a lot of development upstream that caused the stream to become flooded a lot more. And so they actually had a wetlands mitigation company that I used to work for came down here from Maryland to do some restoration. So they actually have some nice plants here. And in coming to prepare for this program, it's nice to see how many of the plants that we put in when she first moved here in 2002, and for a couple years after that, while I worked at Adkins, how many of those original plants have either reseeded or survived. And so anyway, one of the things that I was gonna try to do and is put on a little slide photo that has the link to a presentation I gave last fall for the Bug Fest in Raleigh. And I know they have the big Bug Fest now at Virginia Tech, which is something that started after I left. But in Raleigh, they have a wonderful big Bug Fest. And last year I gave a little talk about solitary bees and wasps. And anymore, because not as many kids get time outside, when you talk about putting in a pollinator garden or doing a pollinator planting, the first thing people think of is actually not always positive. A lot of people have fears of being stung. They have problems with allergies. And so for a group like you all, who I think are pretty aware of things, I think it's still helpful to let you know that you can help other people realize they don't need to be afraid of bees and wasps. And so the vast majority of our bees and wasps are actually what are called solitary bees or solitary wasps. And that means they emerge from their, wherever they overwintered, or sometimes our bees and wasps don't emerge until the middle of summer. So whenever they're active, they come out, they mate, and then the single mom will go make a nest and start collecting food for her young. But instead of having sisters and daughters who work with her and collect things and protect all her young, she actually collects food. If she's a bee, she collects nectar and pollen, and she makes a ball. And I'm going to show you, if you put out a bamboo, what you would see inside that bamboo. And This is not the time of year where I would usually cut it open, but I'm gonna go ahead and switch the camera now. And can you see that okay, Lisa?
Yep, yep, I can.
So let me see if I can, okay, it looks like, okay, I can go in a little bit. Let's see. So can you all see the little larvae down there?
Yes, yes.
So the mom will collect.
You can raise your hand if you need to ask something or whatever, and let everybody know if you can see everything okay.
So these particular bees nest in cavities, but about 70% nest in the ground. So the ones that nest in cavities, you can provide a little bamboo. You just leave the back end closed, and you have to cut it when it's fresh so that it doesn't split. And the biggest hole you need is really about a pencil size, and the smallest size is the size of the littlest sweat bee you've ever seen land on your arm. And the other day, Sean said they thought they saw an Osmia lignaria, which is the blue orchard bee. But I suspect, based on the size of that flower, that was actually a different kind of orchard bee that's a little smaller. The blue orchard bee is about the size of a honeybee. And it's very rare that they actually nest in these cavities that we provide. Most of the bees you'll see in here that are the same size as a honeybee are actually 2 introduced species, but it's still really fun to watch them because they don't actually ever see their young. They just collect food, nectar and pollen. If they're a wasp, they'll collect whatever their specialty is. So some wasps collect a lot of little caterpillars, and other wasps will collect spiders, like for instance the mud dauber wasps. And over here, the other kind of bee that nests in these cavities are leafcutter bees. Can you see the little cells there that are covered up in leaves?
Oh, I can.
And yeah, and those are actually from last year. The leafcutter bees come out when it's a lot more hot and humid. So most of our mason bees come out in very early spring, and you can see they've already finished. Not only did they collect pollen and lay eggs, but their larvae have hatched out and already are pretty much, looks like they're about ready to pupate because they don't have any provisions left. Just a lot of poo in there, huh? And I put one of these, I put out what's called a solitary bee nest out at my community garden. And I don't know if you can see, this is from last year. Let me see if I can angle it a little better. But instead of having bees nest in here, I had solitary wasp. And she would collect about 6 or 7 little caterpillars and put it in one cell. And then I don't know if you can see, there's almost like a little cellophane covering around that. But by the time she was finished laying bringing caterpillars here and laying eggs, the one up at the top was already pupating. So that means that they have multiple generations, whereas these Osmia, the mason bees and the leafcutter bees, they usually just have one generation, and that means when she's done collecting nectar and pollen, she'll lay an egg, and then she closes off that cell, and she'll keep doing that. She'll never see her young hatch out, and they will hatch out, eat those provisions, and they go through instars just like butterflies. So maybe 4 or 5 instars, and then they'll pupate, and they'll probably overwinter as an adult, but inside that pupal case. So that keeps them from drying out. Insects are really susceptible to desiccation. And then they'll emerge at the same time that their mom emerged the previous year, and their dad. And they'll go through that same cycle. And because they don't have sisters or a queen, the mom never sees her young, she doesn't have a reason to be defensive around her nest the way a honeybee or a yellow jacket or a bumblebee would be, because they're protecting their young and their siblings and the provisions. So it's very safe to be around these. And usually people will make a little bundle and hang these up. You want to put it someplace where water won't get them. I tried putting them in a tree once, thinking, oh, that would be a nice spot, and they just were inhabited by spiders, which of course they're fun to watch too. And I have some other houses that I think I'll talk about a little bit later, and some ideas for citizen science if you're interested in doing this as well. So I did want to just highlight a few resources. So I brought Attracting Native Pollinators, that's by the Xerces Society. And then we have Farming with Native Beneficial Insects. And this has all sorts of information about habitat for bees. It shows the bumblebee life cycle. It shows the nesting sites, how to build that. And it has information about all the plants that you need and all sorts of stuff. And then we have a similar book for other beneficial insects. And so if you're an ecologist, beneficial insect is sort of an oxymoron, because everything has a place in our environment and in this world. But we use that term beneficial insect to refer to things that are good for agriculture. And even though we say insect, we really mean lots of different organisms. So we include spiders and other things like that. So this is a really nice guide. And then we have a version of these that are shorter, more booklet form that you can download for free online. And if you want to learn more about native bees, we have lots of information in the Attracting Native Pollinators about native bees and other pollinators at the back as well. But I really highly recommend The Bees in Your Backyard. Olivia Carroll and Joe Wilson just have a wonderful way of bringing all these bees to life in a fun way. It's actually fun to read their writing. And then they also have this beautiful little fold-out guide that you can get from their website. And they are working on a Bees of the Eastern US that I hope will be published pretty soon. And then there's two great books. Heather Holm has self-published these books. It's called Pollinators of Native Plants. And then this other one, An Identification and Native Plant Guide. And if you have these plants at your house, and it's kind of fun to look and see what bees you might expect to come visit those flowers. And she has lots of great detail. And then of course, Bringing Nature Home. He talks about all the insect orders in this book, and you can get it now through your library as an audiobook. Alrighty, and then Lisa's gonna be sending those resources to you all.
I've copied a bunch of links in the chat already, and I will actually be emailing some more information that you sent to me.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to tell everybody that that solitary bee and wasp presentation, I put a copy, it's just a PDF copy of that presentation up at a tiny URL, and it's just tinyurl.com/solitary bees wasps. And there's also all these, a lot more links to these additional resources. So I'm gonna switch back, and so one of the things that is a wonderful pollinator is actually the hummingbird. And so Mom has some really nice plants. Can you all see the coral honeysuckle? And this plant is pretty common in North Carolina, where I live now. And I guess I'm moving around there a little too quickly, huh? So, and so she's got a magnolia, and this is the southern Bay Magnolia, and up on the mountain. Oh, and she also has sassafras here, and these are great early, relatively early spring blooming trees. And this is the strawberry bush, and she has trouble with the deer eating those plants, so she has put deer deterrents down here. But here is one of my favorite plants for pollinators, because I absolutely love the caterpillar that eats this plant. It's the spice bush swallowtail caterpillar, and sometimes they wrap themselves up, so that might even, oh no, I don't think so. Sorry, I have allergies. It's a little bit early for the caterpillars, but the way you can sometimes spot them is to see that leaves are missing or they've been chewed. So that's a good clue, and I'm sure you all know that, all you wonderful naturalists. I wanted to get back to the magnolia, because it's often hard to see the flowers unless you have a big old southern magnolia in your yard where the branches come down to the ground. But when I'm up at Mount Rogers, when I drive from the center, the Blue Ridge Discovery Center and the Community Center down at the bottom of the hill, up to, gosh, Lisa, what's the name of the first place where the Appalachian Trail crosses?
Elk Garden.
Yeah, Elk Garden. There are a lot of magnolias that are kind of that have low branches right along the road there. So you can stop there and actually look at the flowers. And almost every one I would look in, there would be at least one beetle inside there. Now those flowers are actually very attractive to lots of insects, but they're considered one of the first plants that were pollinated in terms of evolution attracting beetles. And here's another plant. These viburnums have lots of little tiny flowers. These aren't quite ready. This is the Viburnum Noodle, or let's see. I can't remember the common name of Viburnum Noodle, but these little tiny flowers are really great for other little pollinators like little wasps and flies. And they're also good for bees, but sometimes the viburnums are slightly less attractive to bees than they are to wasps and flies. And here's another wonderful native viburnum. It's the black-haw viburnum. And you can see these flowered quite a long time ago. And it's been such crazy weather this year. But these actually produce little fruit that are edible. I don't know how delicious they are, but you can eat them. And they have a little bit of flesh on them. And let's see. Lisa, if you have any tips for me moving a little bit better for you all, let me know.
Okay, maybe just a little slower, but that would...
Okay, alrighty. So there's lots of spice bush in here. They seeded in from a big spice bush that we planted many, many years ago. And every year we look for caterpillars on it. And then Mom has some fringe tree, and this happens to be the female fringe tree. And I don't usually see bees visiting these flowers, but they are a little bit fragrant, and oftentimes things that are white actually attract moths, and moths are probably very underappreciated in terms of their pollination. And if anyone is particularly interested in moth pollination, there are a couple new papers that I'd be happy to send to you, or you can use Google Scholar and do a little search on moth pollination.
So
And
whenever you're focusing or holding a plant or something, try to hold the phone as perfectly still as you can so it'll focus.
Okay. All right, great. Is that good? So this is the female flower, and I did post a couple pictures on the iNaturalist site so you could see the difference. And let's see. Anyway, and then the male flower is down here, and they are actually showier. They're a little bit longer petal, and so that's one way you can tell them apart. And so this is one of those things for you moth lovers or people that want to help document pollination. It would be fun to sit out at night and see who comes to visit these flowers, because I suspect it happens when we're asleep. So down here is another, of course, everybody knows this is great for hummingbirds, and these flower along with the coral honeysuckle in the spring at the same time that the hummingbirds are migrating north. And if you grow this in your garden, if you kind of trim the leaves back when they brown out, it'll get new growth, and oftentimes will flower again in the fall when the hummingbirds are traveling south. And
is that the Columbine?
That's the Columbine, wild Columbine. Yep, Aquilegia canadensis. And then here is Pawpaw. And Pawpaw is actually visited. The flowers are kind of shriveling up on this one, on these already, because it's pretty much past prime. But so you'll have to look on the iNaturalist site to see what they look like. They're really, really interesting looking flowers when they're in bloom. And they actually attract flies, and they emit a smell that maybe is not so good smelling to us, but attracts flies. But lots of other things will visit them, because there's not a lot of flowers in bloom in early spring. And so you'll see beetles and you'll see bees if you're lucky enough. And then this is the host plant for one of our most beautiful butterflies, the zebra swallowtail butterfly. And if you're at this time of year, you might actually see some of the caterpillars. I don't see any evidence of these leaves being eaten. There's lots of birds. They, few caterpillars make it to adulthood. Alrighty. Another wonderful early spring flower is this Pachyra for golden groundsel. And let me put that in the shade. And so there's a flower. Now, where I live in North Carolina, this is, there's another species, Anonyma, that's in flower right now. I think there's some up in the Mount Rogers area as well. There's a lot of different species of Pachyra, but this one you can recognize because it has these big, fat leaves. And sometimes people will recommend this as a kind of a ground cover, because once it finishes flowering and goes to seed, these leaves will just stay all summer long, kind of like violets. And it's a beautiful plant. But on a slightly warmer day, I'm sure we would see bees and flies and little wasps visiting those flowers. They're very, very important in spring. There are other species that are more adapted to sun. This is really a shade-loving or a more shade adapted species. Alrighty. One of the things that we planted here is bottlebrush grass, and a lot of times when people talk about pollinator plantings, they forget that actually some of our true butterflies and skippers are actually their caterpillars eat grasses. And this is something that Dennis Burnett with the Carolina Butterfly Society, he shared a bunch of slides about the grass host plants that he could find. And a lot of them were actually introduced grasses. So this is one thing with eye notches. Oh my goodness. Oh, a bee just landed. This is actually an early spring bee. Can you guys see? I'm gonna try to zoom in. Wow. They're, can you see? It's about the size of a honeybee, but this is actually a native bee, and I can't tell for sure. I feel like
no, we can see it on a, you can see it on a leaf. It's not very clear, but we can see it. If you
okay, shoot.
your phone as
And
still as possible.
it is waiting for, you know, slightly warmer weather, and gosh, it's being very patient. So this one, my guess is this is a kind of Coletes. Can you see it?
Yeah, there you go. There.
Okay. And they're said to have more heart-shaped faces. My first thought was Andrena parallelis, which is a large mining bee. So hopefully someone will correct me. We'll find out what it actually was in the comments. So that's pretty exciting because it's been really cold. I haven't really seen many bees out. And yeah, so let's see. We'll go take a look back over here. This is another neat plant that you have up in at Mount Rogers. Lots of geranium, wild geranium. And I always see green sweat bees on here. And geranium flowers are really neat. You can see these have already started to produce seed. Let me see if I can hold still so you can see. And geranium has a really neat mechanism. When those seeds ripen, there's like a spring action. Can you see the little round seeds at the base of that long flower part? I don't know the correct name for it. But when they ripen, that will curl up and catapult those seeds really far from the plant. So it's a really neat mechanism to help carry the seeds away. And here's a very important plant. So this one is called pink turtlehead, Chelone lyoni. And in Maryland, where I used to live, there's a white, and of course it's native here too, the Chelone, let's see, gosh, glabra, I think. Anyway, white turtlehead is the host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is an endangered species in Maryland. And,
well, we found one 2 summers ago on Fairwood Road.
Oh, cool.
Spot butterflies, but I still haven't seen that plant, so I've been looking for it. Does the white turtlehead look similar?
Yep, it looks pretty similar. I think the leaves are maybe a little less shiny, but it's been a while since I saw those. So one of the plants that actually has a lot of specialist bees is not just Vaccinium, but the whole heath family. So Vaccinium and Galaceae. So those are blueberries and huckleberries, but also cranberries. And so we have one specialist bee here called the southeastern blueberry bee, Habropoda laboriosa. And then there are several other bees that specialize on Vaccinium. And one of the links that I am sharing, and Lisa will send in the email after this program, is for a site about specialist bees. And, you know, it can be hard to identify a bee to species. I'm just trying to figure out what to look at next. And so it's really cool to, if you're looking for specialist bees, then there's a good chance that you'll find the specialist on its host plant. So unlike butterflies, whose caterpillars will eat the whole plant, when we talk about a specialist bee, it means that the just the pollen, the bee has specialized on eating that pollen, because pollen can be a little bit hard to digest. Can you all see that flowers? They didn't focus at all. It's not really the flower, it's just getting ready to flower.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, so this is Virginia waterleaf, and this is related to Phacelia, I'm pretty sure. So up on the mountain, you have fringed Phacelia, and also, I forget the name of the purple Phacelia. But this is Virginia waterleaf. This is found along a lot of rivers, and it's got really beautiful flowers when they open up. And the bees love these, all of the Phacelias. And some flies really love the Phacelias. And I remember my first time at Mount Rogers, it was a cold, a cold day up on the mountain with Dr. Shelton. And as we came down the mountain, the whole floor was covered in the fringed Phacelia. And I heard this buzzing that I swore was a bee. And I probably spent 10 minutes trying to catch up with that critter. And it turned out to be a bee mimic. It was a fly that made the same sound as a bee and looked just like a bee, but actually was a kind of robber fly. And they use that, they actually eat other insects. And so they pretend to be a bee, not, you know, because they can kind of stealthily make their way around sounding like a bee. They might even scare some critters, but other ones not thinking of a bee as being dangerous might not realize they should be careful. So this is also one of my favorite caterpillars. The Pipevine swallowtail caterpillar depends on this plant, the pipevine, and this one, if you grow it at home, it's a very slow grower, and you might get nervous when the caterpillars show up and eat almost every leaf, but you don't have to worry. The plant is adapted to that and will grow right back after the caterpillars are finished. And you can almost see, let's see if I can get, can you see? Oh, it's terrible light, isn't it? Let me see if I can hold still, and you can see that's the little, can you see, Lisa?
Oh, yes, yes, yep, good.
Okay, so that's an open flower, and obviously, I wish I could ask you guys, but you could probably guess what kind of critter it might be attracting. Like many of our other early spring native plants, some flies are active much earlier and in colder conditions. So a lot of our spring ephemerals, I'm gonna go look at the little brown jug, because that has another flower that it might be pollinated by beetles as well, but they actually apparently create some heat to attract. So here's one of our evergreen gingers, and the flowers at the base, some people call them little brown jugs, and they are red, and just like the pawpaw, it's really hard to see, isn't it? There, can you see it now?
Yep.
And so those attract moths and little beetles as well. And so a lot of the pollination in our spring ephemerals is actually by flies and beetles who might be active a little bit earlier than some of our bees that need a little bit warmer conditions. So let's see. Oh, another great plant is down here. This one is used a lot in landscaping. It's naturally found in wet places. It's Itea virginica. And this one is just getting ready to flower. It hasn't quite opened. And it's called Virginia Sweet Spire. So it's a nice fragrant shrub. And you can get these from wetland nurseries for, you know, very inexpensive. And these grow relatively quickly, and they're wonderful. And they're used a lot now in urban areas. So that's a great one. And here's another one, that a ginger that is deciduous, and it has the similar little flowers at the base. And if I could ask you, which kind of, I'm sure you all would guess that it might be a fly or a beetle. And that darker kind of color, and they probably would not smell that great if we got up close to them. So I see it's 2:43. Does anybody have any questions, Lisa?
I haven't seen any pop up, but we can open it up. If anybody have a question, you can either type in Q&A or in chat, either one.
Okay, so I think I'll go back and just talk a little bit about the bee boxes. Do you think, did we ask if anybody would like to learn more about that? Do you want to ask them?
Sure. And, everybody want to do a raise your hand if you want to learn more about the bee houses, bee homes. Yep, I think we're good. Let's go for it.
Yeah, okay, great. So one of the other plants, as I'm down here, that is excellent for bees and other pollinators, I think almost any kind, is called wingstem. And I think you can even see, can you all see little wings on the stems? Right here. There's flesh. Is it very clear, Lisa?
What am I looking at? The plant? So that is
on the plant, there's a wing on the stem.
Oh,
it actually, a little fleshy part that sticks out.
Hold a little stiller and then let the camera focus in on it. It's just a little.
Focus, okay. And the way the light is showing, you can kind of see how that sticks out. So that's a really easy one, though it has no flowers. If you see those fleshy things, and they often grow in wetland areas, later on they'll get yellow flowers. We also have one that's called frostweed, and even in the middle of drought, you see bees visiting these flowers, and the frostweed is and what happens is in winter, curls of ice will come out of the stem. I think the stems hold a lot of water, so that even drought, these will produce nectar and pollen. So they're a real excellent plant for other pollinators. And here we have Spiderwort, and that's kind of an interesting one, and produce nectar. And if you see bees visiting it, especially bumblebees, you'll see they do what's called buzz pollinating. Blueberries, cranberries, things in the Ericaceae, also, and things in the tomato family, the Solon family, nightshades also need buzz pollination. And what they do is they release their wing muscles, and it causes the pollen to kind of vibrate. And in the case with Spiderwort, it almost jumps onto their legs from that vibration. So anyway, we'll move on over to the bee houses.
Okay, so that leads us to a question, Nancy.
Okay,
Tamara and
great.
Allison both have the question. It says that, and it's about the bee houses. What time of year would you clean them, or do you even need cleaning?
Okay, yeah. So I've done everything wrong that you can do in terms of the boxes. So we'll talk about that. So that's one advantage to using the bundles of bamboo. If you use those, you put out a little one, then you just put a new one each year. And if you keep them at your house, what'll happen over time is you might get little mites in them, and eventually the mites would eat basically all the provisions. I don't know if the mites eat the caterpillars, I mean the larvae, or not. And then I have trouble with earwigs. So one of the things that I think would be a really good way to manage your bamboo, and I learned this from a young fellow who had been doing it a lot longer than me. He was at Bug Fest. And what he did, and I set up a little demonstration, if you had a counter, then this would be the top of your counter. And when you have bees nesting in your bamboo, the front of the bamboo gets a little plug in it. Can you all see how one of those has a, let me focus that a little better. One of those has a little plug in it, whereas the other ones don't. One, somebody emerged from that one. And so when you have that little plug, then you don't really want to cut that open because you might kill the larvae that's up close to that plug. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so what he recommended was using a vise and putting the vise there, because sometimes, let me see, I'll try to turn this, let's see. I'm gonna switch this so I can see. So if you would try to use a knife to cut that open, you might hurt yourself, right? So if you put this vise over here, and it was at the proper angle, not, you know, down, then you could cut open the end carefully. You just need to cut it enough so that then you can cause the knife to sort of, and if I didn't have, this isn't the best place, and you probably don't want to see me accidentally cut myself, but here you go. So you just would gently pull this apart, and then you could separate out the larvae. And if you have bee larvae, and you would do this at the end of the summer, and I think this would be a nice school project. And so what you could do is separate out the larvae. Whoops. So this one is from last year, and it's a little tiny osmia. And this is actually the one that was labeled Osmia lignaria on the iNaturalist site, is probably this little osmia. It's a lot smaller. And if you look at the proportion of the hawkweed where it was found, this would make a lot more sense. And anyway, so you could harvest, you could look through that and take out the healthy pupae and store them in the refrigerator. Or if you had live caterpillars like these, at the end of the summer, at the end of the summer, these larvae would be in a pupal case. So this is not the best time to be opening up the bamboo. I just did it to show you what was inside. But if you opened it at the end of summer, you would have pupal cases like the one that we saw in this bamboo. Sorry, I know I'm moving around. Let me open that up again so you can see. Now these are not healthy. These are 2 years old, and it looks like they didn't make it from 2 years ago. So that is me not managing those well. I should have opened that up probably and maybe brought them in. Can you see them?
Are they each little gray little bullet looking thing?
Yep. So yeah, so what happens is, here's the new one. So there's mud at the back, then there's a big pollen ball, and at the end of that, between the next mud and the pollen, the mom laid a little egg. Here, I'll hold still. Is that better?
Yes.
And then after she put the mud, then she collected more nectar and pollen, and then laid another egg, and so on until all the way down to the end of the bamboo. And you'll notice the pupae at this end are a lot smaller. Those are the males. And so it's really fun to have a bee observation house. And that's also for cavity nesting bees and wasps. And so here's one. And what it is it's a little house that has holes inside, but then it has plexiglass. And when you open it up, then you can see who nests in there. And this one was from last year, and I really need to clean it out. It had wasps, as it was at my community garden. And unfortunately, the bad thing about these is we have what are called resin bees, and they use a lot of resin around their pupae, and maybe some of the wasps as well. But can you see these? If you try to open this up, it's a big resiny mess. And so what I'm gonna have to do is actually buy new plexiglass to put on there. And this is really something that I think there's opportunity for someone to start making more of these boxes around here, because you can't find them made locally. But a friend of mine made this one. He saw one that was made in England, and he put it together. And the funny colors are because at my community garden they built a new shed and we painted the same colors. But the way this one works is you open it up, and he put little holes at the front. But I didn't know he was doing it, so he made them pretty much the same size as the one from England. But in England, their osmias are slightly bigger than ours. So what's nice about this one is the sizes are small, go from large to small, and you could actually go even smaller than that, and you'd attract a whole different set of bees and wasps. And a friend of mine came up with another idea, which I have to say I didn't think was going to be very attractive to bees, because it's plastic. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. And then the back wasn't closed. But he lives in a forested area, and so the plastic doesn't get too hot in summer. And so finally, one bee started to use it at my house this year. And so it's really fun. Can you see? You can actually see the bee when she was working it. You could actually see her in there depositing her pollen and mud. And they'll carry in little bundles of mud.
So Nancy, how did they get out over top of each other, or do they all hatch at the same time? I mean, I see.
Yeah, so what happens is the ones at the front hatch first, and if somebody dies, then they have to kind of push their way through that. But the ones at the front, and you can see the larvae in there now. I don't know if you can see with the reflection. But the ones at the front are males. They are what's called protandrous. That means they emerge earlier than the females. And then they go look for females in another place anyway. They don't want to mate with their sisters. And this is the design from England. It's for the species of Osmia there that's most common is called Osmia rufa. And this one, when it's standing upright, you can let the case come out. And so you can see that I haven't had much luck with bees. I did have a potter wasp come there. That's what that is there. And then these were also wasps. And you can kind of see a cellophane secretion. Let's see if I can get the light right. Can you all see that now?
So if you would stand with the light in front of you instead of behind you, it makes it easier.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Is that better?
Yep.
So can you see there's like a little cellophane in there? That's a kind of wasp. And it looks like there might be a pupae still down at the bottom, on the bottom there, on the left.
Yep.
Yeah. And so these wasps are also solitary. So they collect, in this case, I don't remember what they collected, but I have had potter wasps and spider wasps. So they collect spiders, and then they lay an egg, and the same thing. They never see their young, and I'm going to turn around. They never see their young, and they don't have anything to defend. So you can basically sit and watch them coming and going. They're just active for a short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And I have trouble at my house with earwigs getting into the hive. So I use this little hummingbird guard for ants. You know, you hang it up, and you put water, and then I hang my bundles below that so that earwigs don't get in. Even though earwigs, I think, can fly, they generally just crawl around. And as Sean pointed out, they're kind of interesting critters themselves. They are maternal. They actually take care of their young. So what I was going to recommend, if you do take your pupae apart like this in the fall, you can store the pupal cases in the refrigerator. But if you have live larvae, if you have wasps or flies, they might not have pupal cases, and you have to keep those outside because they'll desiccate in the refrigerator. And the young man I met, he said you could put them in a box. Now, he recommended a tin because he has trouble with ants at his house. And not ants, with mice getting into the boxes. But you need a clean hole so that it doesn't hurt their wings. That's just so that the light gets in there, and then that they know where to emerge from. And if you put them in a little butterfly cage, then you could keep track of which larvae were which and learn what species you had. And so that's kind of a nice little easy experiment you could do with your pupal cases.
So that was a little paper box or a tin box? Looked like a little.
This one, I don't have any tin boxes, and on my porch where I live, I can keep them outside without worrying about mice.
Okay.
I've done it a couple years, but if I'm not sure, you'd have to have a pretty strong hole punch for mice. Yeah. So there are lots more plants I could talk about. Oh, one is the violet. So that's also a host plant for butterflies, and that's a really common garden plant. But Lisa, I'm thinking maybe we could just take some questions now. That
would be great.
That would be good.
Anybody have any other questions? Anything they want to ask either about the native plants, pollinators, or the bee houses? Pop it up either spot. I know that I mentioned to you my husband giving me a gift, and I'm going to turn the screen on me in a second and show it to you.
Oh, great.
It's an appropriate type of bug thing. So Monica Hull wants to know plants for butterflies in particular.
Which plants? Yeah, you know, one of the best plants, and it's farther down the creek, is mountain mint. And those have little flowers that are attractive to bees and flies and wasps and butterflies and beetles. And they're a lot of times I'll hear other pollinator folks, if you're asked for one plant to recommend, they'd often recommend that. The milkweeds are also great. Of course, they're good for the monarchs, but the flowers are also attractive to lots of other critters as well. And we have a bunch of plant lists on the Xerces website, and on the additional resources that I posted, I included a lot of links to that. And if you're interested in particular plants, or if you'd like to attract particular bees, then it would be fun to look at that specialist bee site and plant plants that might attract those specialist bees. So vaccinium. Oh, one of the plants here, there's a specialist bee, and I can take you over there, is Lysimachia. Now this is a cultivar, but there's a bee that it specializes only on Lysimachia. So if you planted the loosestrife, purple cultivar, loosestrife, but it has beautiful little yellow flowers, and so then you would get the specialist bee probably if you.
Oh, I think there I lost you for a second. I lost your reception. Can you hear me, Nancy?
So are you switching to you?
No, I lost you there for a second. I had Bruce Grimes has a question. I don't think it was answered. I found and I'm probably going to ruin this word, Sphecodes. How do they nest?
Oh, Sphecodes. Okay. So Sphecodes is a kind of a little bee that has well, some of them have reddish bodies, and they're kind of easy to find relative to some bees because they are parasitic, and so they'll be flying above the ground, usually near the bees that they are going to parasitize. So they're actually one way that you can find the nests of some of our other native bees. And yeah, so great question, Bruce. Did that explain? They look a little bit like wasps. Since they are parasitic, that means they lay their eggs in the nests of other bees, and their young eat the provisions that the other mama bee collected for her young. And so they don't really have many hairs on their bodies. They collect nectar and pollen for themselves as adults to eat, but they don't collect provisions for the nests since they're laying their eggs. They're like a cuckoo bee.
Cool. Any other questions for anybody? And then I'm going to share my screen with you, Nancy, and show you this just so that you can see it. I don't know.
Okay.
So here's the front of the box.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
It's all the way around. It's enclosed everywhere else. So it's only in the front, and there's the little bamboo, all different sizes of holes.
That's great.
So
yeah, so what would be ideal? You don't want to leave all of those bamboo up every year. So
you do or do not?
Like you see that some of them have been used. So what you could do is take out the ones that have been used, and if you're so inclined, do what I showed you. Use a knife to gently pry them open at the end of the season.
Okay.
And store the pupae, and then you could put some fresh bamboo into the other spaces and put it up again next year. Or you could take all of the old bamboo out and put fresh, just to avoid having mites.
Sure.
And some of the diseases that can develop.
And then one last thing. So if somebody goes and gets fresh bamboo and doesn't purchase it, it's from nodule to nodule, correct? You want that whole thing open.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Let me show you. It's hard to find bamboo that's skinny enough. So like at Costco, they have them for sale now. And so research has found for Osmia lignaria, the commercial bee, and Megachile, the two commercial species that they have developed. Oh, sorry. Okay. That, can you all see? The optimum length is about 6 inches for the osmia, and so anything smaller than that, the skinnier the hole gets would be better. If you have a bigger hole, it's mainly attractive to a non-native species called Megachile sculpturalis, and yeah. So the first year I got these bamboo, I was so excited. I thought, oh, it's so hard to find long, skinny bamboo. So what you need is when you cut it, you leave one end closed. So that end, whoops. It's hard to figure out the light around here. One end is closed. That's the closed end, and then one end is open. But the first season I put these long ones because they're obviously much longer than 6 inches. And I opened some up at the end of the season. Almost everyone had a plug in it and nothing inside. I think one of the other bees didn't want anybody to nest in those big long ones. And so I don't know what changed, why some did use them this year. But the optimum length is about 6 or 7 inches at the most for the ones that are about pencil size opening, and then skinnier down to the width of the hole of a little of the smallest sweat bee that you've ever seen. Now these bamboo I harvested, and then I waited about a week before I actually cut them. And you can see they got a little bit mangled. So when you're cutting bamboo, it's best to do it when it's green, and so that you don't warp the shape, and you don't get cracking.
Perfect. I think we have another question. Anne Ayer, what do you do with the sword pupae and when? Also, why are you storing the pupae all winter?
Yeah, so so you don't have to do that. The thing is, if you don't take them out, how do you prevent the disease and mite problems? So that's the main thing. You don't have to do that. You can just put out new bundles, and then maybe take those old bundles and put them someplace that is less desirable for bees to nest in. So then hopefully they won't get reused. But because you're going to get a big diversity of bees and wasps nesting, it's not that easy to just throw them out or manage them. So this is just one way that lets you kind of get to know who's doing what, and then maybe over time you could understand how to keep things better. But you don't need to store them. The idea is that if you leave them over winter, then you might have other more parasitic wasps, or maybe woodpeckers or mice that would come eat them. So you're just protecting them. But the other thing is that if you leave the nesting materials out all the time, and this can be a problem with some of the beautiful bee houses that you see. They're just beautiful and inviting to look at, but over time they actually are not good for the bees because mite populations build up and diseases can accumulate. So it's just a technique to help keep things sanitary over time. But if you put out like a small bundle in different locations, then you probably wouldn't have that problem. But for me, I have a very small amount of space and I like to observe them. It's really fun to see them. They're only active for short periods of time. In the early spring, you'd have the mason bees, and then later in the spring, you'd start to see leafcutter bees. This year, I had little tiny wasps early in the spring, a species, a genus called Tripoxylon. And then later in the summer, I usually get spider wasps and sometimes potter wasps, and also grass-carrying wasps. And then some that make these cellophane cases as well. So yeah, please let me know if that answered the question.
Did that answer your question? You can make me raise your hand if you think it did. She says yes.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions for Nancy? Okay. Well, I don't see anybody raising hands or putting any questions up there. And so what we'll do is thank you, Nancy, for coming and
thank you.
being a part of the day and sharing. It sounds like I want to come to your mom's house. It sounds like it's a beautiful garden there.
And the one thing I forgot to mention was when I was thinking about doing this, I thought about going to the Pollinator Paradise Garden in Pittsboro, North Carolina. And that's one of the links I shared. And Debbie Roos has created that garden and a million resources. And you can do a virtual tour, and she's an absolutely fantastic photographer. She highlights all of the critters that visit. So everything that you want to learn, you can find on her website. It's really a fantastic resource.
Great. So I did go, and everybody can see in the chat, I added all of these links that Nancy's talking about.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Conversation. I also added the Xerces website and your email. I hope that was okay.
Great.
I added that. And then, like we said earlier, Nancy has created a little portfolio of information that I'm going to email out to everyone so that everybody can have this information. Of course, Nancy, this is also recorded both on Facebook and with us, that we will also be sharing on our YouTube channel. And so I guess if people have any other questions that you think of later, or you experiment with a little bee house, then you can reach out to Nancy and ask any questions. I'm sure we will be. We are working on our landscaping now here at Blue Ridge Discovery Center, and Allie and I have been working on the trail behind us in particular and creating habitat for all kinds of critters. And so I think one of them that we're definitely interested in making little homes for.
Super.
So, I really appreciate you being here with us and sharing your mom's garden.
Thank you.
Taking the time out of your day, and this very challenging aspect of this virtual walking around with your phone is no easy task, but you did a great job.
Okay, well, I'd love feedback about that, because we might be doing more of that in the future. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
if anyone has any helpful hints or not so helpful, I'd still appreciate any feedback. So thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And the iNaturalist site does not end until 11:46 tonight. Also, I did attach in the website, Nancy brought up one of the things, that there is a Virginia Biodiversity Project. And if you guys that are in the iNaturalist project or on that app website, go on in and add that project as well. And everything that you did this week will also jump into that project as well. So not only are you providing information for us and our Naturalist project, but also you can add the Virginia Biodiversity Project as well. There's North Carolina too, I assume, since you mentioned that.
That is ongoing. So you'll be helping the state of Virginia document, and look for the ones for Tennessee and Kentucky. I know other folks come to the rally.
Yes.
And I didn't think to look for the one for Tennessee, but I can try to do that.
All right.
Yeah.
So there should be one for Tennessee, one for Virginia, and one for North Carolina.
Well, for North Carolina, they have a separate site. So
Okay.
if you're documenting an iNaturalist, they hope to eventually grab those, but you can also upload directly to the NC biodiversity site, but it's an extra, an extra few steps.
Gotcha.
So, but it would still be very appreciated. Yeah, all of this work, I think, are you still gonna email a picture? Because I didn't try to show my.
Yes, I will do that. The one you sent me, I'll send.
I made a little slide with my contact information and the tiny URL. And that has a picture of a pipevine swallowtail on a Betula alleghaniensis, which is the yellow birch. And it's clear to me that that caterpillar knew where it was headed because it blends in perfectly with that tree. So those kind of more subtle connections between insects and other parts of the habitat, we tend to think of their host plant, but that yellow birch is going to be just as important for that butterfly's survival as the host plant. And so the more things we have on iNaturalist documenting these, less well-known connections, then the better we are going to be able to preserve those things.
Excellent.
So,
I did get one other email from a woman, Ann Tucker. She's pretty active with us and volunteers quite regularly.
okay.
You mentioned a bee sanctuary in Floyd. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, yes. So that's honeybee focused. And so, honeybees are introduced from Europe, but all of the things they do for honeybees there are, they try to use, things that are less chemically focused. They try to use some techniques. They grow a lot of herbs and things. And so, yeah, they have a lot of great stuff there. Yeah.
Right. So that's not a solitary bee type scenario. Different.
Nope, those aren't native bees. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.